This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Ziak and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. I feel like I should have done that whole intro in falsetto in honor of this
with
episode.
A lot of breathing.
Yes, exactly. Speaking of the union, Jay, we have a union member with us. You might remember her from a bevy of previous episodes. The ones that she picked last year was the Afghan Wigs 1965. The year before that, the self-titled album by Vast. Before that, Alabama 3's Exile on Cold Harbor Lane. Prior to that, Fastball, all the pain money can buy. Also have joined us for a number of roundtables, including one on Muse in the 90s, where we talked about Muse before they became an enormous band in the 90s. We did talk about this record, but we didn't do a review of it. We sort of just talked about their history and what was happening with them. So this time we actually get to dig into the record, go in, talk about the tracks, all that kind of stuff. Welcome back to the show, Marissa Bucksbaum. Marissa, how are you?
And hearing my own choices recited back to me makes me wonder what kind of psycho I am.
These are all things you love.
An eclectic selection.
It is an eclectic selection, but hey, everybody who listens to this podcast pretty much has eclectic tastes. So,
and is a psycho.
And is a psychopath, yes. But the podcast keeps us in check.
Same.
It's sort of like our injection of anti-crazy. Like we do the podcast and we get chilled out. And actually it's funny you say that because Matthew Bellamy, who we're going to be talking about in this episode because of the album Showbiz by Muse, as I mentioned, he said, I was reading an interview, he said, if I had not gotten into music, I would have been a very angry and violent young man. So there you go. Music does actually, keep you from going off the deep end. But Muse, Showbiz, the first album, their only album in the 90s, was your pick. Did you get into this record right when it came out, or was this something you discovered later on?
I did not. I actually first became aware of Muse during the Absolution album press cycle. I saw the music video for Hysteria on Fuse after high school one afternoon, and was intrigued and got myself immediately to Best Buy, do not pass go, do not collect $200. Picked up a copy of the album, and shortly thereafter, Showbiz and Origin of Symmetry, which were the only ones that were really out at the time and readily available in U.S. record stores.
And Absolution is the band's third record, which came out in September of 2003. We probably mentioned this on the big roundtable. Their second record, 2001. June of 2001 was Origin of Symmetry, and Showbiz came out in September of 1999. Jay, I know you're very familiar with Muse and you're familiar with this record. Do you remember, did you get it when it came out? I don't know if we probably talked about it.
Yeah, I did. I was trying to remember how I heard them. Maybe Virgin Megastore?
Might have been a Virgin Megastore.
Because I don't remember them on the radio right away.
Mm-mm.
So it must have been sampled, a combo of, sample and then just seeing some buzz around the record coming out, being that it was on Madonna's label, right?
Yeah, so this came out on Taste, which
they had
was
kind of an interesting label trajectory.
Yeah, do you want to mention that, how that went with regards to them? Do you know?
What I remember of it is at the very least that they were first signed in the U.S. On, I think Taste is a subsidiary of a British label,
Mm-hmm.
and their first they had a pretty strong, well, strong being a relative term here, American market. And early on in their career, you know, the bands that they toured with, and the company they kept, you know, attest to the market that they were circulating in, you know, with like touring, supporting Red Hot Chili Peppers. They were like in a festival with Live, I think, at one point. But after signing to, or after breaking with Taste, they moved on to Warner Brothers. And because of some snafu with the label, they weren't able to release Origin of Symmetry in the United States until much later than it originally came out in the UK.
Yeah. I remember that. It was like a long time for that second record. And we were like, whatever happened to that band? They had a lot of issues with, I think, Maverick with regards to what songs were on the late. What I think there was actually even a push for him to stop singing so much in falsetto because that wasn't the sound of like rock radio at the time. And they were trying to get him to sing in his lower register more, which really, that's the key to the band in a lot of ways.
That's the whole band. Yep.
That's kind of the whole thing. So yeah, they kind of messed that up in that respect. As mentioned, this came out in September of 1999. It was recorded with John Leckie, who also produced The Bends by Radiohead. So there's always been a comparison between Muse and Radiohead, and I know that's good. We're going to talk about that as we review the record. I'm trying to remember the singles for this. I think Muscle Museum was the first single released in the US, but I don't think anything charted in the US. I think over in the UK, Uno and Cave and Sunburn all got released as singles, unintended as well, but nothing charted in the US until, you know, the first time they charted on a US chart. You want to take out how long it took for this band? The Resistance.
Oh,
wow.
Yes, Uprising in 2009 was the first time they charted in the US. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's insane, especially considering that like the last time I saw them in the United States in an arena was many, many years ago, and they played the Garden.
Yep. And part of that was they didn't actually sell a huge amount in the US. As you mentioned, they had problems with the second record. So the first album doesn't even go gold in the US. The second album doesn't go gold in the US. They don't even register until Absolution, which went platinum. Now that made it to 107 on the chart. Black Holes and Revelations as an album made it to number 9. And The Resistance as an album made it to number 3, followed by The Second Law, which went to 2. Drones went to 1. Simulation Theory 12, and Will of the People, which was released in 2022, went to 15. And we did that podcast in 2020, the Before Times. And that album actually had not come out yet, Will of the People. And if you asked me to name a song off that record, I would not be able to do that.
They're like truly an indie band until the midpoint of their career.
This is a classic case of a grower, like in terms of this is almost like a 70s trajectory in terms of putting out records, and finally like breaking through in the US market. But this did chart pretty much everywhere else. It just did not do well here, this particular record. Let's get into some comments over at Patreon. We did get some comments on this from our patrons, and we have our poll results, which we'll share at the end of the episode. Kyle Bittner said, like you, Marissa, Absolution was my entry point for the band, but I would say that the first 3 Muse albums are all solid and interesting and worthy albums. Black Holes is tolerable, but a better EP, but I digress. While very much influenced by likes of Radiohead, they were a breath of fresh air at the time with cool vocals, wild guitar work, and epic choruses and song structures. I only wish they packed it in after Black Holes and Revelations. Joe Royland said, this was my introduction to the band. Still have my numbered original pressing on clear vinyl that I got as a promo copy. Woo! I bet that's worth a few pennies.
Collector's item, yeah.
Yes. Willie Dillon said, this is such an easy worthy album for me. It might even be my favorite Muse album, but it's a tight race amongst the first three. The musicianship and writing are superb, and it still sounds fresh today. It's also impressive how fully formed they were out of the gate. I could go on, but I'll let Marissa do it more eloquently. The thing he said about how fully formed, they were 20, like Matthew Bellamy was like 21 when he made this record. So just keep that in mind for the people who think that, you know, or are wondering how old. I guess that makes them what? They're probably only in their like 40s now. Like they're not that old.
I think so. We have the technology. 45? I'll Google it.
Yeah. We could get another 20 years of Muse albums. I'm just saying, like, this isn't going to end anytime soon. If they're like the Stones.
God forbid.
Ian McIver said, Muse has only ever done two things for me, Jack and shit, and Jack left town.
Wow.
I couldn't make it through the whole album. To borrow a lyric from one of my favorite bands, I tried, I gave up. Not even a decent single.
What an amplitude between the positive reviews and the negative.
There you go. Well, and the poll is going to shake out in an interesting way. We'll talk about that. But Chip Midnight said the Jeff Buckley meets Radiohead sound was a winning combination. Loved this album when it came out. Muse opened for Foo Fighters and Chili Peppers on tour in mid-2000s, and somehow I wound up backstage with meet and greet passes for Muse. With a handful of people, got put into a room where we were served snacks and wine before Muse came in. I don't remember anything about the meet and greet, but got back to our seats. Figured we suffer through the Chili Peppers when the video screen started playing a message from Dave Grohl saying that due to illness, the Foo Fighters were not going to play that night. My wife and I left, having only seen the Muse set, and still feel like we came out ahead. I remember that tour. I remember when they played Columbus. I saw them on like the Absolution tour, I think. I'm pretty sure that was what it was. Adam Rogan said, Muse basically elevated the early Radiohead sound into something that was noisier and more dramatic, and I loved it. Showbiz was not only a great album, but all the B-sides I found on Napster were fantastic. I was very impressed when I saw them open for Foo Fighters and Red Hot Chili Peppers. The band had an air of mystery about them, at least in the USA, where they were basically unknown at the time. Marv said, Origin of Symmetry was their absolute peak, in my opinion. Darren Lehman said, there is no doubting the musical and vocal abilities of Muse. I commend them for combining elements of prog, alt-rock, and classical music. It just wears thin for me pretty quickly. I truly respect the talent of the band, but they just aren't my cup of tea. Darren, that's a very reasonable response. If it's not your cup of tea, that's totally okay. I wish more. I was actually reading from our Substack. There was a Restacked article about how to dislike music as an adult.
Yeah.
And it's basically like, don't throw a fit. Like, move on. You don't have to.
Adapted into a lecture for like an enormous contingent of Taylor Swift fans on social media.
Yes. That is the comments from our patrons. As mentioned, we will get to the poll results later. But Jay, tell me one thing that works for you on Muse's debut, Showbiz.
We touched on it in the comments, so I'll just emphasize it. It's the triple threat. I mean, they are technically proficient or, really skilled at their music, at their instruments and singing. They write killer songs that are hooky, and they're exciting. They do things that you don't expect. They take turns that you don't see coming. They make sounds and, contort themselves in ways you don't think are possible. It makes for an exciting listen. So I just remember when this came out in '99, it gave me so much hope for where rock music could go. I think at that point we were so tired of like third rate grunge, and these subgenres popped and for a minute and none of those seemed to be going anywhere. And it was starting to feel like, where does this go? How do we make this exciting? Can guitars still be, you know, creative? Have we heard everything we can hear? And then this album came out. I was like, holy shit, we haven't heard everything. Like these guitars don't sound like any guitars I've ever heard before. These bass parts are, not like another rock bass player I've ever heard before. The singer, yeah, some of the vocal stuff he's doing are in the Jeff Buckley or Radiohead space, but he's also going to places that are unique and he's putting it over, top music that's not always like those other bands. So it was really exciting. So revisiting it, it hit me again. I mean, I haven't listened to this album probably since we did the Muse roundtable, and I was just drawn right back in again. I mean, it starts with this really intricate piano part, so you get this right out of the gate. You hear this arpeggio he's playing on the piano. Okay, these guys can play. Like, I'm gonna hear some pretty sophisticated performance here and music. And then they switch into Muscle Museum. Sounding, I was like breaking that down now, and I'm like, that bass tone doesn't sound like any other bass tone I've ever heard before. It almost sounds like a keyboard. It's kind of super flat but really cool melody, and then the guitar over top of it sounds like Russian folk music or something. Like, it doesn't sound like anybody I've ever heard play guitar before. And then you get the bombastic choruses. There's a lot of drama. And just those two songs set the course for the rest of the record, where you're just hearing things that are fresh and new. They're somewhat familiar, but they're familiar not just to the 90s, but I'm also hearing, Queen and classic rock stuff and, guitar shredding from the 80s. And I'm hearing all of the best things I liked about different eras kind of smashed together in this new exciting direction that I think this band put together. And it's incredible they did this at such a young age too. I can't even wrap my head around that. So yeah, that's what I like. I like the triple threat. It's got a little bit of everything. That's what I'm looking for in rock music. What worked for you, Tim?
Well, like you, I was going into this trying to dig a little deeper in terms of, I know I like this record. I listened to it a ton when it came out. I know all these songs front to back, but I really wanted to dissect, okay, what is going on here? Why is this interesting? What makes this different? And from the opening song, you mentioned the piano arpeggios, you can hear what other bands didn't do that were following the Radiohead quote unquote sound, which is incorporate classical into it. There is a lot of classical influence on this writing and the way that Matthew Bellamy approaches keyboards. You also hear that in the second song, Muscle Museum. You have, which by the way, I think Chris Wolstenholme, I think is how you pronounce his name. His bass playing across all Muse records is pretty much amazing. He's got such a groove. He carries a lot of songs. It's like, you think of Time Is Running Out or something like that. He's carrying those songs. He is playing what sounds like Baroque music, like boom, 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 boom. And then that guitar part that comes in, I was saying to my wife, I was like, that sounds like it could be played on a harpsichord. Like if you played it, the rhythm slightly different. And so she enlightened me because I was trying to understand, like, why do these songs sound like they make sense in terms of being rock songs, but there's just something a little off. And she explained to me that when you're listening to the way that Matthew Bellamy puts together these chord progressions, he's not writing like 1 6 5. He's not writing traditional, like what you would think of rock structures. He's often playing with the notes in between where you would normally be. So you get these weird pairings and these things butting up against each other that create very odd sounds in terms of a rock band. And I think that insight helped me understand, okay, this is why this band has always been attractive to me, because there's something that's not normal and not predictable, in the same way that, like, when you listen to a lot of the other Radiohead inspired bands, like you might say like a Paloalto or Coldplay, they picked up on like Fake Plastic Trees, or they picked up on High and Dry, and they kind of went with those approaches where you strum 4 chords and you sing falsetto, and it's melancholy. And Matthew Bellamy sort of takes, I think, more of the the craziness of a song like Just, where they're just like rocking out, and then takes his background. I'm assuming he didn't start playing classical music on this record, like that he has some sort of a musical background, and combines it with that. And I also realized in listening to it and then being it with Radiohead, they're actually Tom York and Matthew Bellamy are not in the same range. Matthew Bellamy has a much higher voice. It's more like Jeff Buckley, but even then, like, it's such a high voice that it's really hard to compare it to anyone else. And it's crazy to me. I know that they put out a couple of EPs before this, how fully formed this record sounds. I know a lot of people talk about, oh, in comparison to Origin of Symmetry and Absolution, this sounds like the first record. But if they never made those records and this was a standalone, you would be like, this is an amazing record. How is this possible that they did all of these things? They wrote insanely catchy songs, and they did it in such a way that is not not the regular way that you write. My wife showed me the chord chart for one of the songs, and it looked more like an Elvis Costello chart, which if you read early Oscar, read the music for early Elvis Costello songs, he doesn't have a chord on the beat. He has a chord like for every strum. Like he's going from like A to A suspended 2 to A suspended 4, then he's going to D, but then there's a D sus, and there's like he's constantly like augmenting the chords as he's going. And that's what's happening a lot with these Muse songs, is like they're not as straightforward as so many of their quote unquote contemporaries at the time. So that was really the thing that I was most excited to kind of dig into with regards to this band, because, you know, a band that can write like Falling Down, which is such an epic song, to know that it's written by a 20-year-old or 21-year-old, like that is mind-blowing to me.
You would never hear me sing. You wouldn't let me begin. So I'm crying away, 'cause you broke my heart in two. No, I will not forget you. Too late, I already found what I was looking for.
There's so many people that can't write that 20 years into their career, let alone being on your first record, and, you know, not even, you know, old enough to rent a car. So That's what worked for me. Marissa, you suggested this record. What works for you on this album?
Well, at risk of making us sound like a broken record as a collective, um, they really are a trio of prodigious technical talents who are able to combine their influences and their preferences into a form of expression that is totally idiosyncratic and distinct and practically, sui generis. Uh, and as a teenager, which was when I discovered them, it also has this Baroque excess, almost a shamelessness to it, that appealed to me for what I imagine are probably self-evident teenage reasons. It's got this like vaudevillian pastiche and ornamentation that embraces ridiculousness and sort of treats ridiculousness as a serious art form. And the kind of like bricolage that they're doing with their influences, it's almost as though, because I know that Matt Bellamy took guitar lessons as a child, and there was like some flamenco there. I know he's got some piano training. You have like this child's latching on to the component parts that they were given as part of their education, but at the same time he's listening to popular bands, and he's there's a music scene in Tenmouth and Devon that he's a part of, and they're all playing in rock bands, and he's taking what he knows and the techniques that he's learned and using them to within a rock 90s alternative context and that like scene. So it really is this product of sort of like a hybrid and non-traditional like way of approaching writing rock music.
Agreed. And one of the things that when you're talking about the bigness of this band, there isn't a point on the record where you go, that is a clear Queen ripoff, but there are a lot of moments where I go, that sounds like a progression that Brian May would write. Like on Cave, there are things that happen where I go, oh, that sounds like something that, like that, just that riff sounds like it could have been the voicing of that guitar riff could have been a Brian May guitar riff, or
It's
stuff like that.
amazing how enormous they sound for a three-piece, and
Yep.
part of that is they have good production, and they are playing loud instruments that are amplified and distorted, but it's also they have a sense of like compositional depth, like the songs, the way they play them and the way that they're arranged. There's so much dynamism and depth and texture, and it's also got this underneath it, this incredibly propulsive groove. It's like a very percussive kind of rock music. You can really, he worships, Bellamy worships Tom Morello and Rage Against the Machine, and you can really hear it. It's got power. It's really punchy. And yeah, like, we were just talking about the Radiohead comparisons earlier. The more you really reflect on them, and the sort of superficial comparisons that the press was drawing, it's like it's a British man with a guitar and he's wailing and he's got a falsetto and it's in a minor key. Maybe there's like a perceptible political bent, but beyond that, it's so much its own thing. It's so self-contained, and to the extent that like they are extremely polarizing in a way that I don't think Radiohead is. Like Radiohead has ascended to like, I don't know, sort of practically legendary godlike canonical status in the 90s rock canon, and you talk to people about Muse and either they love them or they plug their ears and run screaming in the other direction.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you mentioned the flamenco guitar lessons, because you can hear that on a song like Uno, which has that dun 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 dun, like it has, like you can see that movement It reminded me, and I don't think I picked up on that because I didn't really understand that when I first came out. Like, I just thought it was an interesting rhythm part. But it reminded me of, there's a song on Rocket from the Crypt's self-titled album called "You Gotta Move," and it's essentially like a salsa, like it's bump, like it's got this like rhythm of like a like a mariachi band or something like that. Like, it is not a rock rhythm, and but they make it work within the context of essentially a punk rock band.
This means nothing to me, 'cause you are nothing to me, and it means nothing to me that you blew this away, 'cause you could have been number one if you only found the time, and you could have ruled the whole world if you had the chance. You could have been number one, and you could have ruled the whole world, and we could have had so much fun, but you blew it away.
And I think I like hearing, especially in the rhythm, when you take something that is not something you hear in a traditional like American or British rock band, and you inject it with a rhythm which is more groove oriented, and it's not just 4/4 basic stuff, because it allows then the guitars and the bass to like really do some interesting things. And I cannot state how great the bass playing is on this record and across most Muse albums.
Let me emphasize that point, because I know on the subsequent albums, the bass definitely stood out to me. First couple listens. One of the things I wanted to, when I revisited this album, to see like what was going on with the bass here, because I didn't quite remember it as well. And as I listened to the record, I was like, oh shit, it is a huge part of this record. I was probably just taken by like Matt Bellamy's vocals and the guitar stuff that I just didn't appreciate at the time. But not only the bass line's brilliant, he does a lot of work selling the melodies. Like he is working with the vocal melody a lot to emphasize it and to thicken it up. And I think one of the reasons why they're able to sound so big is he's able to fluidly move from like locked in grooving with the drummer, so you're getting that big full rhythm, but then also melodically like jump over in a chorus or during a verse and like hit these accent notes and pick up on the vocal melody, so all of a sudden there's like a harmony almost underneath Matt Bellamy's falsetto, which if you've got a falsetto singer, you need to give them some help in the mid and low range, like sometimes to help fill that out and to sell it. And I think revisiting it, I'm able to appreciate like, oh shit, he's doing so much work on this album. But then, guitar wise, he can play almost anything at that point. He can, which he does on this record. I mean, there's just some crazy guitar sounds on this, both in like the chords, the voicings, there's wild effects. There's super fast parts. There's, he can pretty much, it's a sandbox to do anything at that point because there's so much work being done with the bass.
It's interesting. I read an interview with Matt Bellamy from some years back, and he mentioned that as he was learning to play the guitar, he, I guess, for whatever reason, he thought that he could not get himself up to a good enough technical skill level to like really pull off these ripping, intricate solos, which like when you hear him solo, you're like, buddy, you're fine, dude. You're great. But he instead opted to embrace more like complex, chaotic stylings in, I guess, the chord voicings themselves. My technical lexicon is probably way off here.
Hmm.
But instead of going for, sort of the straight, I guess, finger picking virtuosity of like, I don't know, a classical guitarist, he, I guess, took that as what he was aiming for, abandoned it, and decided that like the step down was what he's currently doing, which is fabulously intricate, and his finger work is outstanding. So I guess to him this is like phoning it in practically.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Because I look at like the guitar riff in Muscle Museum, that chimey, like to me it sounds like razor blades, or like like it's so sharp and it's so intricate. I want to go back to what you said about the bass pairing with the vocal. Philip, I think, is a great example. Like in those verses when he's like bum 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 bum, the bass is right there with him. And a much simpler bass player would just play the note underneath, just ride the dum bum 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 bum. The fact that he is matching the vocal melody makes it much more interesting than 99% of bass players that are making commercial, essentially, rock and roll. A lot of them are just sticking to the root notes or maybe throwing in a fill here and there. What, if anything, does it work for you on this record, Jay?
In revisiting it, I wasn't as compelled by like Falling Down and Unintended. And I think that was just because I was hearing more of the Jeff Buckley / Radiohead like expected path there, because they're quieter, and 6/8 feel they lack some of the bombast. I think they're still good songs, but they weren't as exciting to me. Overdue is another example. It's like it's a louder song, it's noisier. It does have the bombast, but there's something about it that just sounded more like typical 90s alt rock to me.
Yeah.
So just a couple tracks on here that are a little under the quality of the others. I did expect to be more annoyed with Bellamy's vocals with time. Just my expectation, like, oh, I bet if I revisit this, I'm going to be annoyed by his singing. And it wasn't. I loved it.
You
I
almost,
don't know.
it's almost a little frightening, because he'll finish a song. I think it was maybe Cave, or no, it was Showbiz, the title track, one of my favorites. He ends the song and you're like, is he dead? Like he just, you feel like he had to have expired after sustaining the note for that long, and it's such intensity.
Yeah, I mean, he's just going for it. And I don't know, there's just something really engaging for me about that. Just hearing somebody, you can hear the breaths, you can hear him just physically pushing himself to the brink, which I don't know, I just find that really compelling in a performance. So that's about it. There's just material that's a little flat, but this is, in their catalog, this is a top one, or between, somewhere between 1 and 3 for me. So not much to complain about. Anything not work for you, Tim?
I did feel like Unintended, like you said, kind of isn't. There were elements of that where I was like, oh, this sounds like Karma Police, like the melody and the picking and stuff like that. Like if that was played on piano, that would be similar to what's in Karma Police. And I agree with you. Overdue sounds a little more generic. Like it doesn't have the same originality as a lot of the rest of the record. But other than that, like it's, again, I listened to this record a ton when it came out, and I never have went, I don't feel like listening to that. Like it has a spot in my brain and it will always live there. So, but they're just like a few, to me, when you're talking about the first 3 records, like this is, Origin of Symmetry to me is the perfect record for them. Absolution and this are like on 2 opposite ends of that. Absolution goes much more the other way, and then this is obviously the more stripped down, not stripped down, but just the more basic end of them, and they both work in their own ways. but it's I don't really have a ton that I dislike about this record. Marissa, what about you?
Well, the unintended defender has logged on. I love that song. I I understand why it would be a frequent pick for like this is the one song on the record I'd discard if I could. But to me, it's the virtuosity of that composition. It's just like its perfection shines through in that sort of sparse, stripped down format. And what's astonishing to me is that, at least to my ear, it sounds like a lullaby, and that what they managed to do is tailor a lullaby so that it fit within the context and the aesthetics of a rock record. And I just think it's a remarkable piece of songwriting. But as far as what doesn't work, it's honestly, Sunburn kind of annoys me. It just like it. I've listened to it too much. I've heard it too many times. The back half of the record for me, or like the middle to the back half, is more interesting. But it's hard to, yeah. It this is enshrined in my memory as well. This record, it's even though it's not my favorite Muse album, Absolution is for me unimpeachable. It's the one I actually find myself revisiting the most frequently, just because it works so well, steadily start to finish. It for me, it's the easiest entire album to listen to.
I also want to mention, we're talking about the record, there are a ton of B-sides to this, and a lot of them are as good as this record. And I don't remember who it was exactly who said about going on to Napster. Who was it? Was it Willie Dillon maybe that said it, or it might have been. But I remember getting this record and then going on to Napster and then later LimeWire and just trying to find every Muse B-side I could, because everyone that I heard, I was like, oh, this is really good. I mean, maybe it's not, maybe the production's a little bit, off a little bit because they didn't whatever care about it as much as the studio as the album, but there's so many, and it continues on with the next like 2 or 3 records. There's just so many B-sides that are another band could write a whole album based on those songs if he had not decided not to use them. Yeah.
And in that they're a very rich B-side band.
Right. And I think that they collected them on the Hullabaloo soundtrack,
Yes.
which had most, not all of them, but I think most of them from this
Yeah,
era.
like you listen to Agitated and you're like, Jesus Christ, or Yes Please, how did this not make it to the album? This just rocks. This whips. It is really, and if you wind up listening to Hullabaloo, I think it was also released with a concert DVD. DVD, oh god, archaic format. But you see them playing some of these songs, and my god, are they a powerful, aggressive live band.
That's it. It's crazy because I mean they still pretty much tours a 3-piece, right? Like they don't. I know they take a lot of equipment, but they're not like bringing out an extra guitar player, a keyboard player to cover Matthew Bellamy's stuff. Like what they play is what they play, and that's still impressive, even if I don't particularly care for what they're doing. With regards to the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 albums.
I'm with you there. And I feel like every listener to this podcast who's a Muse fan will co-sign. I really do hate being that guy who's like, oh, I miss when, so-and-so band was good. But like this really is, sort of the paradigmatic case of a band that sounds like a 90s band, so recognizably is a product of that climate, going from our demographic to very considerable departure. Not in aesthetic, not in sensibility, but in just the execution is now totally changed.
I think I have to revisit Black Holes and Revelations because I didn't spend as much time with it as I did with Absolution.
I love BH&R. But that's where I draw the line. After that, nah.
I don't know what is the next. The Resistance is after that, and that was the one where I went. That's the one. Uprising is like got the
Yeah.
Gary Glitter.
After
beat,
that,
right?
they become a singles band for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And it also got like really weird. Like there's the United States of Eurasia and Exogenesis Symphony Part 1, 2, and 3. And apparently
he was
he's
in
a bit
like
of a
his
conspiracy theorist.
InfoWars phase then, or not like InfoWars. That makes it sound more malicious and than it actually was. I think he was just sort of, it's unseriousness pursued with a kind of discipline that you wouldn't expect.
Well, I mean, remember, there's a B-side to this called Con Science instead of Conscience. Yeah. So I feel like Matthew Bellamy's been on the conspiracy train from the start, pretty much.
He's been contrite about it recently in in interviews.
And I guess there's a box set that came out. I don't know if you got that in 2019.
I did,
which
yes.
Lists all the original demos that they did. And I didn't realize this, but like songs like Plug-in Baby were a part of their original songs that they obviously reworked for the next one. But it's got all the EPs, singles, and B-sides and live B-side tracks and pretty much everything that you would want in terms of your Muse completion. There's so much that they have. 113 tracks on 9 CDs or 4 vinyl records. Yeah, it's a lot of stuff, and a 48-page book, which, yeah. So we don't need to talk about why this was or wasn't successful, because I believe we covered that in the roundtable with regards to them gaining success in the 2000s. This was the place setter, or the plate setter. This was not the breakthrough. I'm still trying. Them opening for Live is, for me, one of the weirdest things I could, like, Live in 1999 was such a non-factor with regards to popular music. I imagine like what shed they were playing, where like, there's probably like a 15, or I guess it'd be like a outdoor venue of like 10,000, and I'm guessing maybe it was half full for Live at that point. I can't imagine they were filling stadium or hockey stadiums or anything like that at that point. So Matthew Bellamy was like, what the hell?
Really hitching themselves to the trains of like various college and summer festivals, at least early in their career in the United States. I mean, when I first saw them, and this was as late as 2004, it was at Temple University as part of the MTV Campus Invasion Tour. So
wow.
They played with like Razorlight opened for them.
Wow.
That's so
in
weird.
Philly. 2004. It's just it was wow. It was a time.
I don't know what is going on with his, like, so these songs, they're all like basically like one word titles, and I felt like with the next record, it almost is like a weird like dystopian sci-fi album in some ways. But I'm just looking at the singles for Will of the People, and the songs are Won't Stand Down, Compliance, Kill or Be Killed, Will of the People. Like, what, dude, like, what do you it sounds like teenage angst. The government is evil. Like, I don't know where the fun is anymore with this band. Like, they just seem to be so self-serious.
They were more fun when they were dialing up the like melancholy to Kafka-esque extremes, and when there was this it was almost like German expressionist in its like stylizations. It was still fundamentally respectable, even if it was over the top. And now it's over the top and unbelievably stupid, and the music is not as good.
Yeah. I don't understand. There's a lot of people involved technically in the new record. like a lot of technical assistance. Like what kind of tech do you need for a 3-piece rock band in the studio? Why are there like 9 or 10 mixing technical assistants, audio engineers? Like what the hell you got going on in there? That's crazy.
He's almost like, as the band has aged, he as a songwriter has temperamentally regressed and remains like remains a 14 or 15-year-old, a disaffected 15-year-old.
Also the album, like this is an okay album cover. I mean, it's clearly like a Photoshop type thing from 1999. The one for Will of the People is just like so bad. It's like their heads, but they're statues, but they've like fallen down. Like, what does that mean? You were gods and then you fell? Like, why are these giant statues of you on the cover? It looks like a bad AI cover or something. I don't quite understand what's going on there. And the simulation cover is just for Simulation Theory. That's somebody watched Drive. It's way too 80s synth pop. I don't know what's going on.
I know, it's like it's Miami Vice for UFO chasers.
Well, I think that why that makes such a bad move for them is that, like I said, for me, this record, Showbiz, represented like, oh, this is the future of rock. No, obviously the rest of the genre did not go in this way, but it felt that way at the time. And when you look at all of the other album covers, like they maintain this like
nostalgia,
one step ahead future kind of feel, and then you get the Simulation Theory and it's this 80s retro thing. You're like, wait a minute. We went from being on the cutting edge of the future with your music to now all of a sudden we're like,
and like the future that they are embracing, it feels like, well, you picked the worst possible parts of it. There's going to be like a song issued as an NFT. You're gonna, I don't know, and it's like marketing gimmicks. And I understand that to some extent their whole shtick has always been embracing showbiz and the unavoidable constructions and artifice of showbiz, but it's become like demoralizing. It's a little too I guess they finally figured out something that does invite shame and that they should be ashamed of. And I will always be willing to see them live. They still put on an incredible show. They're probably one of the best touring rock bands out there, but they're no longer beckoning to me at all with their studio records. They've lost me as that kind of fan.
Let's share our final thoughts in terms of our rating for this record. Worthy album, better EP, decent single. I'll share the poll results when we're done, but Jay, where do you land?
Worthy album. This is you're Marissa, you just hit two of my favorite 90s albums in your last two picks, so don't blow it next time.
I won't. I'm gonna keep up my winning streak.
No, but I was delighted to see we were going to go back and revisit this. Like I said, I probably haven't listened to it since the roundtable, which was a few years ago, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Not just for the nostalgia, but I think it still delivers. It's a really daring, creative, but energetic album. So worthy album for me. Where you at, Tim?
Same. Like I mentioned, there's really only 2 songs that, and I don't even know that they're bad. I would just swap them out maybe with other B-sides, to be honest. And this would be fine as a 10-song album. I mean, I don't think it would hurt it if you just relegated those to B-sides. But yeah, it's a worthy record, and as are the first 3. I mean, start to finish. So hopefully in the 2000s episodes that we do, maybe we'll get to Origin of Symmetry, because there is so much wildness to talk about with that record. You talked about him, being a guitar player, Marissa, that isn't focused on like these amazing solos, but the guitar work on that record still to this day, I go, I don't understand what he's doing. Like, I understand there's probably some pitch shifting effects and there's probably this is happening and but because I've picked up a guitar, I know how it works, but I don't understand how he's getting the thing to do the things that he's doing. So, and then on top of that, you have insane songs like Micro Cuts, which sound like it's this like gothic, like church music. And then it turns into this insane rocker that is just, so we'll get to that hopefully eventually. This is perfunctory, but I'm going to ask you, were the album better EP or decent single, Marissa?
Oh yeah. I mean, a worthy album that still sounds surprising and inventive today, which is saying something. And I mean, it is, I guess, one of those surprising effects of him repurposing all these kinds of archaic or non-traditional forms, that it has paradoxically endured in a way that if you were to select from a bargain bin a bunch of other 90s three pieces, rock musicians, rock bands, they would sound dated, and these guys just Showbiz doesn't. It's it holds up for me, and it might be in my top 3 Muse albums. I think we all sort of came out on the it's somewhere in the top trio.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think honestly, I think if you talk to most Muse fans, they'd probably say that. I mean, there might be some hardcore fans who are ride or die on all the albums. I find that hard to believe, but there are people who ride and die with bands that I'm like, what really? That's your band? That's
the beauty of this podcast, is you encounter like every possible permutation of that person.
Right, exactly. I didn't know there were many Bloodhound Gang fans, but I guess there's a lot. The poll, however, for Patreon shook out a little different. It was 64% worthy album, so majority, 21% better EP, and 14% decent single. That means there was more than one vote for decent single. So there are a few people in our community that are like, I don't like this. This ain't for me. We know Ian was vocal about it with his comments, but there's more out there. And I
love that. I love a strongly worded rebuke.
Shit sandwich. Whoops, almost took my keyboard out there. Thank you, Marissa, for another great pick. Like Jay said, these have been some fun albums to revisit because, like with your last one, 1965 by the Afghan Whigs, we know these albums well, so it's nice to dig in deep and interrogate why we like these records, as opposed to just discovering for the first time. So thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, for having me. It's always a pleasure.
I want to remind folks who are listening at home, they can go to digmeoutpodcast.com. That's the homepage. There's still homepages on the internet. You don't have to go to a social media site. You can actually go to a real website that isn't Amazon and listen to things and purchase things. You could purchase, for example, a DMO union membership at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. It's where you get to vote in the polls like the one for this episode, or in our monthly album review polls, which are submitted at digmeoutpodcast.com by anybody for either of our 2 podcasts. Yes, we have 2. One of them is the 90s Rock podcast, and we have our 80s Metal podcast, which we launched in January of this year. We're already like 7 or 8 episodes in. Like we're chugging along now. It's me, it's Jay, and it's our friend Chip, who Jay and I were absolutely floored to learn that Chip is not Chip's actual first name. I have thought that for the last 25 years, and now I am like,
it never occurred to you.
It never occurred to me.
Well, when he told me that, I was like, okay, well, his name must be Charles then, but it's not. It's something else,
right?
And we don't know what it is. He won't
tell
us. Or he's making us guess, I think.
I got to imagine it's got to be something like Fauntleroy or something like he was like, I got to go something simpler. But what goes with midnight? Like, is it like Is it something? Is it a weird play?
Yeah,
Like, did this
right.
parents play off of the last name?
Right.
I don't know. It's a mystery. We're gonna
It's
try
haunting
to.
you.
That's so, you know, like how shows have like episodes that are just one episode and they go to, and then the next week it's another episode. That's how the podcast is, except we also have this continuing mystery throughout our podcast, which is, what is Chip's first real name? And that's what's going to take us all the way. It's like Lost. Like, you're going to find out what do the numbers mean. We're going to figure
it'll
it
be
out.
the frame narrative for the whole show.
Yes, that'll be the, and then when we get to the end, the mystery will be revealed, and people will be disappointed, because that's how it always happens when TV shows reveal their mystery. People go, "Oh, okay, they were asleep the whole time. Okay, it was just a dream.
Oh, he was wearing a mask and he just tore it off.
It was just a mask. It's Mission Impossible 2. Mask, 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 and slow flying doves."
His name was just Richard all along.
Also, want to remind folks, the Box newsletter, you can get to it through our website. It's at Substack. It's where you get daily updates from us. Yes, history of the band. Whenever we've got a new pull up, we do a history of the band for that. Whenever we got new episodes out, when there are new reviews every week, we do albums, occasionally books or documentaries of 80s, 90s, and aughts relevant music, artists that were we might talk about on this podcast. And then lastly, Apple Podcasts is where you go to leave positive feedback for the show. So for Jay, I'm Tim. We're out, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.
So